Voice of Victims. The Vatican Summit on Combating Clergy Sexual Abuse begins Thursday, and advocates for survivors are speaking out. We have reaction from Rome. Full court press. A group of 16 states files a lawsuit contesting President Trump's emergency declaration on border security. Film critics. How a new video is playing a role in the Trump administration's campaign against the Iranian government. And a former cardinal's sins. My thoughts on the Holy See's decision to defrock Theodore McCarrick. On EWTN News Nightly for Tuesday, February 19th, 2019. Good evening from Washington, D.C., and thank you to those of you joining us from around the world for news from a Catholic perspective. I'm Lauren Ashburn. Sex abuse survivors gathered in Rome ahead of a global meeting on the crisis. They say the Vatican Summit must deliver action. One American advocate says she hopes defrocking Theodore McCarrick is just the beginning.
I can think of 10 other bishops who are substantively, credibly accused of sexual abuse with minors or sexual misconduct with adults who should be laicized.
Ann Barrett Doyle and other survivor advocates are in Rome this week. Alan Holdren is the EWTN Rome Bureau Chief. Alan, today Catholic religious orders from around the world are apologizing. Tell us what they're saying.
Well, Lauren, the two major umbrella organizations for religious orders of men and women worldwide issued a statement in which they asked forgiveness of victims of survivors of sex abuse, especially those that were victims at the hands of religious men and women worldwide. These are two groups that represent more than 630,000 religious priests, brothers, and also religious women, nuns and sisters. They said that they were ashamed of what had happened under their watch and that they would implement greater accountability measures to make sure that these things wouldn't happen again. They said that perhaps a strong sense of family within their orders had led them to be blinded to the warning signs of these abuses, Lauren.
The summit begins on Thursday, but already Rome is teeming with people. Tell us who's there.
There are a lot of people here at the moment sort of taking advantage of all of the media attention that's being placed on the summit. We've got more than 300 foreign journalists that have come in that are accredited for this event. It's a huge boom in coverage. So really anybody who would like to be heard on the issue of sex abuse in the church and making improvements, people from the SNAP network to Ending Clergy Sex Abuse and Bishop Accountability are all here. There was also a group that met in the center of Rome in a large square for a silent protest today to protest the Vatican's silence on homosexuality, and also saying that there was a very big moral crisis. They were there praying the gospel and reading from the catechism.
Let's talk about women or mothers. Are there any of those folks taking part?
So within the program, there are a couple of women, 3 different women who will be giving presentations out of a total of 9 presentations that will be giving keynote speeches to the people participating in these events, mostly bishops. There are 190 people total, and around probably 10 people are women. There's not a huge turnout, but let's remember that this is the Pope calling bishops to Rome to have a summit on this issue. It's just a matter of the participants were called by the Pope to represent the different bishops' conferences of the world, and largely they are not women.
Alan Holdren, thank you so much for that report. We'll be seeing you all week talking about this issue. You're our EWTN Rome Bureau Chief. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Lauren.
Joining me now is Mary Rice Hassan, Director of the Catholic Women's Forum. Mary, welcome back to our broadcast.
Thank you so much, Lauren.
We just heard Alan say that there aren't a lot of women who are going to be there because only bishops were invited. What do you think about that?
I think I'm delighted that we were able to get some information over there, because I think the archbishops, the bishops, the cardinals, they need to hear the voice of women.
Let's talk about that information. We have a study right here, Giving Voice to Catholic Women, a survey of U.S. Catholic women on the clergy sexual abuse crisis. Let me tell you, some of these numbers are really astounding. About 5,000 women were surveyed. It found 1 in 3 personally knew a clergy member accused of sexual abuse, and 1 in 5 personally know a non-family victim of clergy sex abuse. I could raise my hand yes to both of those. What do you think of those numbers? Do they surprise you?
Well, no, and I think one thing that's really important is, while about 1 in 10 women were either victims or have a family member who was a victim, I think sometimes we tend to think of the victims of this abuse crisis just in terms of those numbers. But we do have to realize that women know the priests who are accused. We know other people. And this has had a huge ripple effect on the lives of women, of families, of Catholics in the pews.
Of course, I knew 3 of the priests who were named in the Pennsylvania grand jury report. A friend of mine who had been abused by one of them. I mean, it touches me, it touches my parents, it touches families. But let's go back to this report. 87% say not much or no trust in Vatican officials to do the right thing.
Right, and that's
a
kind
high number.
That's really, I hope that calls some people up short, because we can see there's more trust that people have, that women express towards their parish priest. Obviously, they know them better. They have less trust, about a third, less than a third, have strong trust in their bishop. But only 2% say they've got a great deal of trust in the Vatican's handling of this.
And 96% say it is essential to establish a code of conduct, yet they're downplaying, the Vatican is downplaying results that are going to come out of this. So the fact that the women who were surveyed here are going to get some answers, it doesn't quite seem like that's the case.
No, and I think the summit over there is a good thing, especially for those countries where they really haven't focused on this. But for us here in the United States, it's not going to have much practical impact, which means we need to encourage our bishops, that laity need to continue to speak out, to ask for those measures, to ask for integrity. That's what this comes down to.
Universal call to holiness.
Holiness and integrity, institutional integrity.
Very personal impact that this has. Your survey found 3% of women say they suffered clergy sex abuse either as a child or an adult. So that's women.
Right.
We're talking a lot about homosexual clergy sex abuse. Does this number, this 3% number, surprise you in light of the heavy focus on homosexual abuse?
No, because the numbers from the John Jay report and things show that even then there were 20% of the victims were women or girls, that was child abuse. You know, so that doesn't surprise me, and frankly, I think we're going to hear more about that as we're starting to hear more from adult women who are victims.
And nuns.
Right, and nuns. But I think that highlights the fact that you can't just fix a child abuse problem without paying attention to the greater problem of sexual misconduct and just failure to really take to heart what it is that our church is teaching.
Thank you so much, Mary Rice Hassan. I wish we had much more time to talk about this, Director of the Catholic Women's Forum at the Ethics and Public Policy Center. A founding member of the advocacy group Ending Clergy Abuse says Pope Francis is facing resistance from top Vatican officials and adds many questions about cover-up remain.
Cardinal McCarrick is being laicized because he's an abuser. But all the individuals that we know of that covered up for them aren't. And until there's action against them and they're laicized, the announcement of Cardinal McCarrick really doesn't mean very much.
Peter Isley and other advocates are demanding the Pope say what he and other top Vatican officials knew about McCarrick's sexual wrongdoing. Peter is the U.S. spokesperson for Ending Clergy Abuse, and he joins us from Rome. Peter, tomorrow you're going to attend a meeting with other survivors. You hope Pope Francis will attend. What are you going to tell the Holy Father?
Well, it's astonishing if he isn't there. So, I mean, we're fully expecting him to be there. And I think we're there to say what he already knows and what we've been saying for a long time. Coming with us from our organization are survivors who are leaders and activists on this issue around the world. He's not going to have together in that room a greater brain trust and wisdom trust about this issue. And so we're hoping to, we're not going to tell our stories. He knows our stories. I think he understands what happened to us. We need to really get down to brass tacks. We need to find out what's holding up progress. And what we need, and I think everyone pretty much agrees with us, is about zero tolerance. Pope Francis has been promising this for 6 years, and it's time to really deliver on his promise to survivors and to the children of the world. And that has two elements to it. One, zero tolerance, of course, for any cleric that has sexually assaulted or abused a child needs to be removed from the priesthood. That is not a universal law in the Catholic Church, and he can make that a universal law in the Catholic Church, and that has to happen. And the second thing, of course, is zero tolerance for bishops that have covered up these crimes. Now, some of these bishops that are going to be coming here, they've been involved in this activity. And if you've done that, if you have covered up for child sex crimes, you shouldn't be a bishop.
But what I don't understand, Peter, let me interrupt you here. What I don't understand is that the Pope has lowered expectations for this summit, but the entire world is watching. And what we're hearing now is, well, there's going to have to be follow-up. So what do you hope specifically comes out of this summit when it ends on Sunday?
Well, I mean, that's one of the questions we're going to be asking him at this meeting. Is like, what's the holdup? What's the problem? I mean, he set this expectation up, which was fine. I mean, he brought the world bishops together. That's important because this is the first acknowledgement that this is a global problem. This is a problem within the global system of the church, and it has to be addressed. And so, I mean, zero tolerance and what he's able to do, and there's nobody that can stop him from doing this. He changed the catechism. He went and did it. I mean, he just went and did it. He's done things where if he feels he has to do it, he's going to do it. He has the unique authority and power to do it. We want him to exercise his authority and power and live behind the words that he has said. He has picked for his name, of course, the name of Francis, which was an incredibly bold thing to do, especially for a Jesuit, but he picked the name of the most beloved universal saint of the Catholic Church, a person, a saint, a man that everybody around the world embraces. And St. Francis said many great things, but one of the things that he said was, the only sermon anybody needs to hear is what you do. And that's all that counts now, is to take these actions that he can take, and he alone can take it, and to simply do them. And that's the only homily or sermon or message that people need to hear, including survivors, coming from him over the next few days.
Peter Isley, spokesperson for Ending Clergy Abuse. Peter, thank you so much for joining us.
You bet. Thank you.
The Vatican reveals it maintains guidelines for priests who, despite their vows of celibacy, have fathered children. Holy See spokesman Alessandro Gisotti says the document exists, but it is only for internal use. It primarily requests clergy who have children leave the priesthood and assume responsibility of a parent. The document's existence was first reported by the New York Times. And a report in the Washington Post says church leaders, including Pope Francis, ignored the abuse of deaf children in Argentina and Italy. Charges are pending against 13 people in the alleged abuse. The accused ringleader, an 80-year-old Catholic priest, is set to appear in court next month. Pope Francis lifts the suspension of a priest and poet from Nicaragua. Father Ernesto Cardenal had been censured after he took an official position in the government of the leftist leader Daniel Ortega in the 1980s. The 94-year-old has been in the hospital for the past week. For more on this story, including why St. John Paul II removed priestly faculties from Father Cardenal, visit our partners at CatholicNewsAgency.com. The Vatican says a lawyer who holds a top position at its Supreme Court is not currently working after facing a credible accusation of sexual abuse. Monsignor Joseph Punderson was listed last week by the Diocese of Trenton as having been removed from ministry, yet he appeared in a Holy See publication as an official working on annulment cases. And an assistant Anglican bishop in Australia is set to be defrocked over charges of concealing clergy abuse. 78-year-old Richard Appleby is charged with not taking action after being told a priest had sexually abused a child. He would be the highest-ranking Anglican priest in the country to be laicized. Stay with EWTN for comprehensive coverage of the Abuse Summit. EWTN News Nightly will have reports and analysis all week, as will our partners Catholic News Agency and National Catholic Register. 16 states have sued over President Trump's national emergency declaration to pay for a border wall. The president believes he'll have success in court challenges, and he says open border Democrats and the radical left are responsible for the lawsuits. White House correspondent Mark Irons tells us how Catholic Church leaders are responding. Good evening, Mark.
Good evening, Lauren. Catholic bishops have expressed deep concern over the president's plan to circumvent congressional approval and fund construction of a wall. In a statement, the president of the U.S. Bishops' Conference, Cardinal Daniel DiNardo, and Bishop Joe Vasquez, chairman of the Committee on Migration, write, "The wall, first and foremost, is a symbol of division and animosity between two friendly countries." Now, I asked a top White House official about that today. Do you understand where the bishops are coming from when they say things like that?
You know, I spoke with Hispanic pastors. They met here with the president who actually have received death threats from drug cartels and that obviously continue to penetrate our border. We know that the wall helps protect American lives. It helps to protect our communities. We want to be able to stop criminals, gang members, and smugglers from coming and abusing the vulnerable families.
Mercedes Schlapp, a Catholic, was referring to a meeting last month the president had with Hispanic leaders from evangelical churches across the country. They thanked the president for demanding greater border security. Some Republicans are opposed to the president's emergency declaration. Congressman William Hurd of Texas says it sets a dangerous precedent, and Catholic Senator Marco Rubio says it would take funding away from existing military construction projects, for example, on bases around the country. And he says the U.S. can't afford that. Lauren.
White House correspondent Mark Irons. Thank you, Mark. Vermont Senator Bernie Sanders is running for president in 2020. He earned a loyal following in his 2016 campaign with proposals including free college tuition and single-payer health care.
Together, you and I and our 2016 campaign began the political revolution. Now it is time to complete that revolution and implement the vision that we fought for.
The 77-year-old is an independent and identifies as a socialist. He will run as a Democrat. His voting record includes defending abortion and same-sex marriage. Coming up, the war of words escalates between President Trump and Venezuela's leader, and how the White House is using a video to put pressure on Iran's government. Embattled Venezuelan leader Nicolas Maduro compares President Trump to a Nazi. In a speech yesterday in Florida, President Trump denounced Maduro's socialist government and asked the country's military leaders to back the opposition party. Today, Maduro responded, lashing out at the president for delivering orders to another country's soldiers, adding the United States is acting as if it owns Venezuela. The Trump administration is stepping up its efforts to put more pressure on Iran. The State Department released a new video today on social media using the Islamic Republic's former embassy to send a message to the Iranian people. Correspondent Wyatt Goolsbee has more from the State Department. Good evening, Wyatt.
Good evening, Lauren. The State Department's goal in creating the video outside the old Iranian embassy in Washington is to show a contrast between how the U.S. and Iran behave in the last 4 decades. Now, critics say the video is exploiting a diplomatic facility and could be seen as propaganda.
The State Department denies that. In the video, the special representative to Iran, Brian Hook, explains how the U.S. has maintained the former embassy since the Iranian Revolution, then shows images of violence, poverty, and protests near the former U.S. embassy. The video is part of the Trump administration's plan to put pressure on Iran and to call on the people to stop supporting their government. The U.S. has also imposed crippling economic sanctions, which are having a negative impact on doctors and hospital staff. The doctor saying the sanctions have made it harder to get medications for chemotherapy and other illnesses, and that they have to work double duty to get all the medicine their patients need. State Department officials say food and medicine are exempt from sanctions, but medical professionals in Iran say it's not true. This week, Iran's president described the sanctions as an economic war.
Special Representative Hook says Iran needs to give up their nuclear weapons program and stop supporting terrorism. Another major problem in the country is a lack of religious freedom. Hook has been talking with Christians who claim to have spent time in jail for openly preaching the gospel. The Christian advocacy group Open Doors USA ranks Iran as the 9th worst persecutor of Christians in the world. Lauren?
Correspondent Wyatt Goolsbee reporting from the State Department. Thank you, Wyatt. An opposition group in Syria releases a video of what it says is the aftermath of a government strike on the country's last major rebel stronghold. The attack reportedly killed at least 4 people, including children, and struck the main bakery providing bread for people in the town and in nearby villages. Up next, my commentary on the Vatican's unprecedented decision to defrock former Cardinal Theodore McCarrick. Iowa's Republican Governor Kim Reynolds says she will not appeal a judge's ruling last month striking down the state's fetal heartbeat pro-life law. She called it an extremely difficult decision. The law would have been the most restrictive abortion law in the nation. Reynolds says now is the time to, quote, seek other ways to advance the cause of protecting the unborn. As you heard earlier in the broadcast, Vermont Senator Bernie Sanders says he will run for president in 2020. Within hours of the announcement, the self-identified socialist had raised more than $1 million. President Trump's campaign weighed in, saying Sanders has already won the debate in the Democrat primary because every candidate is embracing his brand of socialism. Joining me now is Matthew Continetti, editor-in-chief of the Washington Free Beacon. Welcome back to our broadcast, Matthew.
Thank you for having me.
He no longer has the luxury of running just against Hillary Clinton. So can Bernie stand out in a crowded field and recapture the magic of 2016?
Well, recapturing the magic is hard, but I think Bernie Sanders enters the race with a few advantages. One is he has high name recognition. Another is he has very committed supporters, and you saw that with his fundraising right out of the gate. And when we have this primary with so many candidates, it's going to take a lot to stand out, and Bernie already has that. He can also say to the other 19 candidates on that debate stage this summer, you know what, you've been following my lead for the last 4 years. I'm the trendsetter, so why not the real deal as opposed to some of the imitators?
Well, recently President Trump has gone after socialism pretty hard, not just here, but also in Venezuela. We heard earlier President Maduro is saying, hey, you know, you're not running this country, get out of here. Will President Trump's charge that the Democratic Party is going all in on socialism stick?
I think it will, and I think it speaks to President Trump's excellent political instincts, that he understands that for him to win re-election, the race can't really be about him. It needs to be about the opposing side. And so he's been setting up the stakes in 2020 in terms of abortion, in terms of the border security and the wall, and then finally in terms of socialism. And of course the Democrats are playing right into his hands by going and adopting these extreme policies, and of course by having a self-avowed socialist, Bernie Sanders,
leading
among
right.
his frontrunners.
Finally, Matthew Continetti, do you think that the Vatican Sex Abuse Summit that we're going to see later this week can help the church turn the corner, even though much of it's going to be taking place behind closed doors? This is a story that is just being played over and over again in mainstream media this week.
Well, I think actions speak louder than words, and we're beginning to see maybe some accountability in terms of what happened with former Cardinal McCarrick, but I think for the church to regain some of its ground that it lost because of the child abuse scandal, more actions need to come, not just closed-door summits.
Thank you so much. Matthew Continetti, sorry about that, editor-in-chief of the Washington Free Beacon. Finally tonight, my commentary on the ongoing clergy sex abuse crisis. The Vatican has finally defrocked former Cardinal Theodore McCarrick, who wielded major power when he was the Archbishop here in Washington. What's amazing to me is that this took so long. Pope Francis ordered the investigation in 2017. McCarrick did not resign as a cardinal until last year, and it wasn't until just a few days ago that the Vatican said McCarrick sexually abused children and seminarians and solicited sex during confession. There are reports that say the Vatican knew about at least some of the allegations against McCarrick months before he was made a cardinal. What we need to know now is how many church officials were involved in covering up for McCarrick and other high-ranking leaders who engaged in sexual abuse. And what signal does it send that it took so long to act against a former archbishop who was such a force in American politics? It's no surprise that McCarrick's downfall comes days before Pope Francis has convened a sexual abuse summit with bishops from around the world. And those of us here in Washington have watched McCarrick's successor, Cardinal Donald Wuerl, ask the Pope to accept his resignation under pressure after a Pennsylvania grand jury implicated him in covering up sexual abuse in his diocese in Pittsburgh. The only way to restore confidence in our church is to move more quickly against those who betrayed our trust and those who aided and abetted them. We need a universal call to integrity and holiness. For all of us here at EWTN News Nightly, to all of you around the world, thank you for watching. I'm Lauren Ashburn. Let's keep in touch online. Follow me at Lauren Ashburn on Twitter, Lauren Ashburn EWTN on Facebook. Good night, and God bless you.